So I just wanted to say a few words tonight about the reason we're gathered. The Meck Dec, Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, 1775, May 20th. That's why we're here. And I will tell you, in my opinion, there's a correlation to today, the very things we're going through that happened here in Mecklenburg in that very time. And the theme is real simple. One word, freedom. Freedom, that's it. That's simple, right? But also there's two other underlying themes there. One is fear, and the weapon that is used against freedom. That's fear. But silver lining, the punchline, the thing that gives us hope afterwards is sacrifice. That is what is the defense of freedom, sacrifice. And we can learn that through all these stories. So I called a couple of scholars, some folks that know, Scott Seifert. Does everyone know Scott Seifert here? Wrote the book on the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. I talked to him about some things today, and I took some notes on it, and I wanted to relay those to you, and how freedom, fear, that weapon against freedom, and then sacrifice, how that found itself woven into the story of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, and how that can teach us lessons. Now, my grandfather, who passed away a couple of years ago, World War II vet, told me one thing. He said, Tariq, when you tell a story, you always tell it in 3 parts. So I'm going to tell you that story in 3 parts of the Meck Dec and how we can learn something today from those great patriots then. So point number 1, what was the environment like without freedom? What was it like in 1775, 4, 3, 2, in those years without freedom? Well, I can tell you one thing. We've all read about the Stamp Act, and we know what that was like. But if you don't remember, let me refresh your memory. It would be like today, the equivalent of them putting a tax on the internet. You want to learn something? Well, you got to pay. That is the equivalent of the Stamp Act. All paper goods, stamps, deeds, access to the legal system. Lack of freedom. Attacking your freedom, right there. But let me tell you some other things about Mecklenburg, Charlotte, the towns, the surrounding areas that maybe you didn't know. Largely Presbyterian was that area, that part of town. If you wanted to get married, you had to go to an Anglican church of England and a minister from there to marry you, which didn't exist in Mecklenburg. You have to go down to Charleston to be able to do that, right? The English government then also taxed the people of Mecklenburg to pay for the Anglican churches, and they weren't even here. Again, they had to go to Charleston for that. State-sponsored churches in the colonies. All of those things coming together was about destructing the freedom that existed. Now, what do we know today about our freedom and what's being destructed around us? The censorship that's happening on social media. Show of hands, how many people are in or have been in Facebook jail in the last year? It's funny, but it's not funny. Censorship. How many of you, show of hands, how many of you have heard that we should defund the police or take away their weapons? You all better raise your hands, because that's a fact. It's a rhetorical question. How many of you heard that we should abolish single-family zoning for restorative racial justice? These, my friends, are narratives not based in reality. It's about attacking your freedom. And if it doesn't resonate with you exactly what happened with those founding fathers, those people that created the Meck Dec, that is a problem. And I don't know, we do not have that problem in this room today. Part 2 of my story, Grandpa. I'm doing part 2 now. Fear. Fear, oh, that is the death of freedom and independence. Fear, the status quo, the swamp. Power corrupts. Power absolutely corrupts. Because you know why? People don't want to lose that power. And they choose, many times, the path of least resistance to get them there. So let's go back to Meck Dec again. Once again, what can we learn from those founding fathers in Mecklenburg County? So Captain Jack, just saw him run through here, handsome fella. Goes to Philadelphia, delivers the Meck Dec to the swamp. Y'all know that story. Consider the 2 delegates that Jack delivered the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence to? Richard Caswell and William Hooper. Show of hands, who knows who I'm talking about? Be honest. Yeah, it's going to be a much smaller percentage. Caswell, behind-the-scenes player. He's a publicly renunciated British rule. That kind of thing was not his style at all. He would have championed such a message, and it would have been seen as dangerous and provocative to him. We know that about Caswell from what we know. And as an indication of Hooper and his state of mind, in September 1775, at a meeting of the Provincial Congress in Hillsborough, North Carolina, nearly 5 months after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, Hooper said, "We have been told that independence is our object, that we seek and shake off all connections with the parent state. Cruel suggestion! Do not all of our professions, all of our actions contradict this?" This dude not down with the Meck Dec. Okay? It's pretty crystal clear. What would Caswell and what would Cheney and Romney, Caswell, Hooper, right? Whatever. What would they have thought as they read this Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence that Captain Jack rode all the way up to them? Because this is the crux, my friend, of a great debate that we have right now. It is inconceivable that either of them would have brought Captain Jack's message before the General Congress. Inconceivable. Especially when the sensitive negotiations were underway regarding the Olive Branch petition. That's what was going on. Imagine your leaders today presented with a controversial thing that would not just be painful, but would also potentially strip them of that power that they hold. Yes. So, in the summer of 1775, our third member of the delegation to Congress from North Carolina, the other two weren't enough. There's a third guy, Hughes. Hughes was not advocating for the cause of American independence. In fact, even as the revolution unfolded over the next several years, Hughes never fully committed to the cause. Adams doubted whether Hughes really believed in American independence at all, even as late as July 4th, 1776. That's a year later, ladies and gentlemen. So, Exhibit A for his argument was a delegate from North Carolina named Joseph Hughes. And in quotes, I say, "I then believed," wrote Adams, "and I have not since altered my opinion, that there were several who signed with regret, and several others with many doubts and much lukewarmness. The motion for the Declaration of Independence," Adams continued, in quotes, "has been upon the carpet for months and obstinately opposed from day one by these very people." Ironically, both Adams and Jefferson alluded to this simple explanation in their letter. Privately, Adams wrote to his friend on July 15, 1819, "Its total concealment from me is a mystery which can be unriddled only by the timidity of the delegates in Congress from North Carolina." Jefferson's response to Adams corroborates this suspicion. "You remember as well as I do," Jefferson wrote to Adams, "that we had not a greater Tory in all Congress than Hooper, and that Hughes was very wavering, sometimes firm, sometimes feeble, according to the day was clear or cloudy." How many politicians do you know that fit that bill? The real culprits were the North Carolina delegates who suppressed the horrid and treasonable resolves of their constituents. So, we know that the people in Mecklenburg met and did these things. We know that Captain Jack went and met with Caswell and Hooper. What we don't know, and what is debated to this day, is the Mecklenburg Declaration real or not? That's indisputable, the things I've said. So as you think about what's happening today right now, and you think about suppressing facts and things that occur, you think about what doesn't and does make the press. Is this the first American government cover-up? I think it's very reasonable to assume what we know today and all those facts, that the only reason we sit here and debate should or should not we recognize the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence is simply because these guys went up there to a bunch of entrenched bureaucrats and they said, you know what, that sounds painful. That sounds like it will not allow me to have the power that I currently hold on to. Does that not sound reasonable to you? I don't know if it's true or not, but it sure as hell sounds reasonable to me. And that second point right now of the swamp and power corrupts and what these folks in 1775 were up against, if you think about today's environment, think about the 2040 comp plan. We're not going to be able to even have another public hearing because that's not what the powers that be want. They just want to pass the thing. When you look at mayor and council, giving themselves raises and voting themselves in for more terms. Well, it certainly sounds a lot like what they went through in 1775, doesn't it? And when we think about the media, the whole point is we don't see until 1820 that there is even any record of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. Well, is it because it didn't exist? Or is it because the media didn't report something that occurred? Because the powers that be didn't allow it to be reported. There's clearly a reason that that could have existed. And think about our media today when they tell us, oh, well, Hamas they're just fighting for their freedoms over there, right? And Jerusalem, man, they're just shooting these rockets, they don't care. The media today is not that different from the media of 1775. And then finally, and I promise I'm almost done, Grandpa, point number 3, this is for you, my friend. These people, nonetheless, of all of these mounting issues that hit them up, that said, you're probably not going to be successful. And if you're not successful, you're probably going to die. Right? They did it nonetheless. They knew what their actions would cause them. Yet, sacrifice was the word on their minds. They knew what they'd have to endure, yet sacrifice is what they accepted. Ephraim Brevard. Anyone driven down Brevard Street? Show of hands, you driven there? Yes, that's a street. That's a person too. He was 27 years old. He was the person that captured and wrote the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. He was captured in the siege of Charleston. He was put on a prison ship, released and walks home from Charleston to Charlotte. Later dies. He knew what he was getting into. He did it nonetheless. That Captain Jack, the great guy we just mentioned, saw him run out here earlier. I don't know how that happened. Because in reality, in 1780, the British burned down his tavern and they threw his parents in the street, who then died. And then he had to flee and later died. They knew what they were into. And they nonetheless did it anyway. Because they understood the fear that the mainstream, the fear that all these people will put in us to keep the status quo and not do the right thing. It's more important that we are willing to sacrifice in the face of that fear to ensure freedom. So, I'm going to end with a quote from this guy named Ronald Reagan. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We get to pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. They must be fought for, protected, and handed for them to do the same, or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States where men were free. My final point and call to action from you all is, if the Mecklenburg Declaration story taught us anything, it taught us the value of freedom. It taught us how fear is the enemy of freedom, and how sacrifice, personal sacrifice, is what it is that can make fear lose and freedom win. But the other thing it teaches us is very simple. There's no one person that did that. There's no one name we call. Captain Jack is an easy one. Rode a horse, did the thing, right? The list of people. Go around Charlotte and look at the street names. Because by and large, the street names are also a reflection of the cast of characters who gave up everything so that we can be sitting here right now in this freedom that we enjoy. A group of us together did that in 1775. And I will tell you, the last lesson we learned is there's no one person that's going to come save us from what's going on right now. It's the group of us together that will fight for the freedom. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe that you could be the next Tim Moore fighting in the General Assembly to protect our freedoms? Do you believe you could be the next Madison Cawthorn fighting for our freedoms in Congress? Or Pat McCrory as governor and mayor fighting for our freedoms there? It's not just about believing in it, folks. You got to sign up and do it. You got to put your own freedoms on the line to believe in this and do it. And I will leave with one word, 1519, or in a history lesson tonight, folks. Cortez. Everyone know what he said? Burn the ships. Burn the ships. We all have any fallback plan. This is our country. We will burn the ships before we allow this to happen and exist in our country. God bless.